live?
I think we are.
Okay. Good morning. It's still morning. It's 11:30, and we're about to get our service started. Today we have Sean hiding over here, Ashton, I'm Courtney, my husband Charlton, and Chris, and we're going to be talking about the spiritual realm during the actual discussion today, and then we're going to, right now, pray and then read Luke chapter 16 before we get into discussion on the spiritual realm. So, hi, glad you guys are watching, and you want to pray?
I'm going to pray first, but I want to get that out there. Wait, I thought we were...
Luke 16.
Yep, Luke 16. Alright, I'm pray to open. Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you that we are able to come here together and learn about you and learn about what your word says about the spiritual realm. And we pray that as today progresses, that we are able to have good discussions and learn a lot. And I pray at the end of this service we will feel fulfilled in some way, and that we are growing closer to you and closer to each other. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Alright, Luke 16. Do you want to read it?
Yeah. Do you want me to read half and Chris read the other half? Or does it matter?
Are you asking everyone else?
I'm asking Chris.
Everyone else, like, does Chris want to read the other half? What's the halfway point?
You can start.
Chapter 19.
Chapter 19.
Yeah, verse 19.
Chapter 16, verse 19. So Courtney would read the first 18 verses, you would read the remainder of the chapter.
Okay. Luke 16. Now, he was also saying to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager. A manager. And this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be manager. The manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig. I am ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes. And he summoned each one of his master's debtors, and he began saying to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill, then sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings. He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much, and he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust the true riches to you? And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts, for that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God. The law and the prophets were proclaimed until John. Since that time the gospel of the kingdom of God has been preached, and everyone is forcing his way into it. But it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one stroke of a letter of the law to fail. Everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries one who is divorced from a husband commits adultery.
There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted
sumptuously every day, and at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to feed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried, and in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and to cool my tongue. For I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into the place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. He said to them, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead.
Dang.
Any comments?
What? I don't get verse 9. Is verse 9 Jesus speaking, or is that the manager speaking?
Verse 9.
Mm-hmm.
And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings.
I don't get it.
That's Jesus talking.
But why would he want us to make friends by means of the wealth of the unrighteous, of unrighteousness? What is he saying?
So that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings?
I feel like if you get caught up with friends by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, to me I'm thinking, like, do you participate in their bad behaviors? I don't get it. I'm confused. Are you looking it up?
Because I'm kind of confused too.
Charlton is confused.
He is.
That's never happened.
It happens.
No, that happens all the time.
I know, I'm just joking.
I'm just good at pretending like I know what I'm talking about. I'm just kidding.
Are you looking up in the commentary?
I'm looking up something else.
Oh.
I'm gonna look up the commentary. Our sandwich is done. So even though we're all on our phones, we're all looking up stuff on the Bible, right? We're not sitting
Yes.
here Facebooking secretly.
Yeah, no.
I was playing Pokemon.
You don't even have it on your phone.
I have Pokemon Quest on my phone. But you have to turn sideways to play.
Oh, okay. So we would know if you
You
were
can play
on
it
it.
sideways. Like, I played games sideways.
Hey, I can read my Bible sideways, so I'm gonna try to.
It's
That's actually new. You didn't used to be able to rotate it.
That's cool.
you've been able to for a while.
Not on my phone.
Yeah, I've done that before.
It didn't work before.
Oh, probably because I have a plus. Do you not have a plus?
I have an X.
I know, but they might do it different for phones that are like bigger.
Also, whenever you get figured out what you're figuring out, can you explain to me basically all verses 1 through like
The
11?
chapter?
because I pretty much didn't really understand what's going on here. Was he praising him for like lying on the bills, or what was?
Okay, so what this is saying, which I mean, is more than I would have known previously. So first of all, it's strange because this parable is actually, like, usually Jesus' parables have like a person who's good as the protagonist of the story. In this case, it's somebody who's wicked, and he's going behind his master's back. And like being a steward, those people are like representatives. They not only are representatives, but they can have the authority of the master of the house. And so he went out and, he performed business deals in the ways, and I guess the people praised him for that, but perhaps his master didn't know. And so it says the steward is being released for apparent mismanagement, not for fraud. And this is why he is able to conduct a few more transactions before he's released.
I found an interesting commentary, like an interesting tidbit in the study Bible on what that chapter or verse 9 might mean.
Okay.
So they're saying that the wealth of unrighteousness is money. So in this commentary, so the unjust steward used his master's money to buy earthly friends. Believers are to use their master's money in a way that will accrue friends for eternity.
So buy friends?
So not necessarily buying friends, but using your money for God's purposes for eternity and not for your own selfish desires.
I see what this is saying now. So if you start in verse, 10 and go to verse 13, it says, "He who is faithful in very little thing is also faithful in much. And he who is unrighteous in a little thing is also unrighteous in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust the true riches to you? And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No one can serve two masters, for either you will hate the one and love the other, or else you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth." So the purpose of this parable is explained right there, saying, so this steward, he was considered unrighteous, and it's, I guess, pretty obvious why he was considered unrighteous, because he immediately goes and does a bad business deal, like disrespecting his master. And so, just like it says in verse 10, he who is faithful in little is faithful in much, and unrighteous in little is unrighteous in much, is saying just simply that. You have a guy here who he did bad things with this little that he was given. So how is it possible that you could expect this steward to, be faithful in so much? And this also, verse, 11, talks about who will entrust true riches to you. It's sort of reminiscent of when Jesus tells people to store up treasures in heaven. So you have true riches, things that aren't real wealth. And so you have the wealth of the unrighteous, which is physical things and money, things that don't really have eternal value. And then true riches, which then contrasts things of eternity. You got things that glorify God, your Christ-like character, whatever you want to call it, that would be less about the world and more about eternity.
Okay, so I'm going to try to explain this in my own words and tell me if I am off track, because I feel like I'm not getting it. But so there's this guy, and he's totally blowing all of his master's money. Like, he's just wasting it and not using it for what it's supposed to do to build up his master and everything. And the master finds out about it and is like, "Dude, I'm going to let you go because this is not good." And this guy's like, "Okay, well, I can't do anything else. I'm not able to work, hard work or whatever, and nobody's going to want me. So I'm going to go over to all these people that owe my current master. I'm going to tell them, you know what? Write down that you owe like half of what you owed before." Now, they didn't actually, his master's still getting screwed over. But now what he's done is that guy has now made friends with these people, so that way when he leaves, they're going to be like, "Dude, you were awesome to give me, forgive half my debt to you. Like, you're an awesome dude. I want to be friends with you." And is that what he's saying? Is that what's going on?
Basically. So
Okay.
what it says there in verse 8 is what's important, though. It talks about how the Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely for the children of this world in their generation, wiser than the children
Wait,
of
the
light.
Lord? His master?
Well, I'm reading a different translation. It's not the Lord as in God. It's
Oh.
the Lord as in a Lord, like a
Okay.
Lord.
Zardak.
Lord Zarek,
Like
for
who?
example.
Like Lord Zardak.
Yes.
It's like a little L Lord.
Yep. And so what it's saying is, like, the master commended him for that because it was something that the world would do. And it says that he is more shrewd than children of the light. It's basically
What does
saying
shrewd
that
mean?
Shrewd is, I
Clever.
want to say wise or
Sneaky.
clever or something.
It's not wise.
So the dude who got screwed over is, like, praising him for screwing him over?
Yeah, and it's assumed that he doesn't understand that he was, because all the master sees is, hey, this guy brought me back a debt that people owed me. He's brought me all of this money back. Wow, that's great. And so he praises him for that. He doesn't praise him because he got screwed over.
He doesn't
Praise him
know.
'cause
He
he doesn't
wasn't in
know.
charge of that.
Yeah, he wasn't in charge.
Oh.
The steward is the master of the house's.
Okay, so what you're
handles the
saying
business
is that
affairs.
he sees that someone owes him 100 and now only owes him 50. He assumes that's because they got paid.
No,
No,
he assumes
sees
that it was
you have
50.
50, and he's just as like, oh, this got paid. Cool.
But I thought it showed here that the people didn't pay. The servant or whatever was just like, yeah, just mark that it's less than what you owe.
Exactly. The master doesn't understand.
So
the master
on-
isn't in
yeah.
charge of his affairs. The,
So,
the
yeah.
manager is. That's the point. The manager. It's like the CEO is not aware of what happens at the company, firm level, unless it's a very small company. But imagine like Walmart. Do you think Walmart, the CEO of Walmart, understands every single thing that happens here at the Ozark Walmart?
No, but like,
He's not going to know the records. He's not going to take time to read over all the records.
but I
of
don't
the
see
bills.
anywhere where here it says that he marked it as paid. It's just that he just marked it as, yeah, you owe less. So that's what I'm understanding is you're making this like this is he sees that he got paid and that's what he's praising him for. But like I don't see where that. All I see is the guy's like make friends by telling them they don't owe as much as they owe, and then the master praised him for it. And it's like I don't see how you can make the jump that the master sees that, oh, you got me paid, so I'm happy that you acted shrewdly to get me paid. That doesn't make sense.
What do you think it means to take your bill and write 80?
It sounds to me like he's forging how much someone owes.
And is that something that they would say today or something they would say in Bible times?
I don't know. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to understand. None of this makes sense because it's like I don't really understand what it's saying, and I don't see like anything here being said that's like being paid or nothing. It's just it looks like they're forging records in order to make friends by saying, hey, I'm not going to make you owe as much, even though.
Well, they make friends and cover his rear.
Well, see, that's the thing. I don't think he's trying to cover his rear, because if he was trying to cover his rear, like, this isn't going to help. Unless he's lying to his master that, oh yeah, now you've got like, $1 million for this, and the guy's like, cool, where is it? I want to spend it. Like, I don't know, like, it's just, it seems to me, from when I read this, and this is my very limited understanding, like, it looks like it to me that essentially the dude's like, I'm screwed, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to go make friends with these people by, telling them you don't owe as much as you used to. And
Well, he did tell them what their full. He did tell those people what
he's
their
right.
full.
He's right. I found some places that are saying, yeah, it's taking. What it means by taking your bill and writing is it's basically like a receipt or a contract, for example, written down saying you own. Like he asked them how much do you owe, and that's not in writing. Instead, he says put down 50 in writing. And
I see.
That's what's said. Yeah, so he's right.
But he didn't charge them for the full amount that they actually owed. Like he didn't write the bill for the full amount.
No, he just wrote the bill for the 50 and the 80, and then called it good there.
And that way he made friends with him so that when he's let go, because he knew he can't save himself, when he's let go, he now has friends to help him because before he got let go, he helped them with their debts by saying they don't owe as much without actually paying it. So what's curious to me is that the master praised him for that.
Right.
So his master apparently knows that
he doesn't know. That's the thing. That's what keeps coming back to is the master doesn't know. The master doesn't understand.
Then why would he praise the unrighteous manager for acting shrewdly? So he had to know what he did in order to praise for acting shrewdly. He has to know something. So what is it he knows? The Bible doesn't give us any more context. So to me, it appears that there's a direct correlation to that action of reducing the bill in order to make friends to acting shrewdly. And therefore the master knows what he did, but says, hey, even though you screwed me over, that was smart. Like, making some friends before I fire you. Like, I don't know.
I could see that, because if he made friends with those people, they might want to borrow from him again.
Maybe. I don't know.
But, I don't know, when it says because he acted shrewdly, I just, I don't know. I feel like he got the praise because he was being a stinker and the master didn't know, but I see your point too, so.
See, I don't see the evidence for the master not knowing. Because how else would the master know what to praise him for acting shrewdly about?
You're looking it up.
Yeah, I'm seeing places are saying different things. One here says, his master commended neither the action nor his action, but solely the provident care about his future interest, to which the action displayed, a care worthy the imitation of those who have in a view nobler futurity, eternal life. Basically saying the master didn't appreciate what he did, but saw that it was wise.
Because think about this. In our day and age, someone's about to get, axed for mismanagement of a CEO and stuff. What's the first thing they do? They try to secure themselves. Secure some money or whatever, try to weasel their way into having some more self-security, right? Now, that money could be taken up by the police for fraud or whatever and everything. So it's kind of futile to be working on trying to self-secure. Whereas what this guy was doing is saying, oh crap, I got caught for what I'm doing. I'm going to go make friends. Things that cannot necessarily be, taken away by the police or whatever, right? Like, what?
Every time you do this, Chris goes boom, 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 boom. The seat. That's just all.
I didn't really notice until after you said that. I was very listening until we had that.
I'm so sorry. It was a distraction out of the corner of my eye, and then I noticed she saw it too, and then I wasn't paying attention anymore. I'm really sorry. That was rude.
Anyway, and so I think what it might be here is like the fact that this guy was wise in knowing that money wasn't going to help him after the fact. What was going to help him is relations. Is that right?
It's once again remembering that this whole thing is it's not about a good person, it's about a wicked person. And it's also assuming that the master is also wicked, who he notes and commends a person for wicked actions. So nobody in this situation is good. And in fact, if you look at the context of this verse, if you go directly after all this, it talks about how Jesus says in verse 15, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts. For that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God. So what that's saying there is put it into what Jesus is trying to say. The manager is the Pharisees. And the Pharisees do things that the master, which is the people, we can say, commend. And they go, oh, they do great things, and these great things are great. But then Jesus is saying, but God knows your hearts. For that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God. So doing something wicked that men think is okay is not okay in God's eyes.
So the Pharisees' master was the people.
Essentially. Or you can call it the Sanhedrin, or whatever you want to call it. Whatever would be most appropriate. Probably the people in this case makes the most sense.
What is verse 9 saying then?
And I say to you, make friends for yourselves, but by the means of the wealth of the unrighteous, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings.
I think I need to read that in another version.
Because, I mean, you're saying that...
That's what the
Essentially what-
Master's saying.
Wait, the Master's saying this?
It says, it's Jesus talking, but he is explaining, not quoting what the Master is saying. So verse 8, and his Master praised the unrighteous manager, blah, blah, blah. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by the means of wealth and unrighteousness, so that when it fails...
Are you sure that seems like a far stretch to say verse 9 is the words of the Master through Jesus' mouth?
Not the words, but a generalization. Why is that a hard stretch when it says,
Because
the Master praised the...
Okay, and the Master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly, for the sons of this age are more shrewd to their own kind. Yeah, and his Master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly, alright? That is where I see the Master's action. From there on, I don't see the Master's action. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in their relation to their own kind than the sons of light. Alright? That, I feel, pulled back into Jesus just explaining again. I don't feel like this is saying, like, the Master said, for the sons of this age or more. I think Jesus was explaining why the Master was praising. I don't think there's words coming out of the Master's mouth in this parable here.
Okay.
And I don't understand how you're making that correlation.
No. I mean, you seem to got it, so go for it. Keep going.
I'm confused.
No, seriously, go. I'm not sure. I really don't know.
Okay, that's what I'm just trying to figure out. Is like, I don't know. Like it's confusing to
I
me.
agree. Because if he says, "And the Lord commanded," but then he says, "And I say unto you," and I think that you're right about it. It sounds like it's going back to him explaining.
Yeah,
But I still think it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, that's what's so weird about this is it's like, because okay, if we take it from the fact that everything from for the sons of this age are no longer the Master speaking, Jesus would be saying, for the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. Okay, now it goes back to the word I don't really understand shrewd, because I thought you were saying shrewd was kind of like a bad thing.
Not necessarily. A synonym of shrewd is wise.
Oh, okay. So I thought we said shrewd wasn't wise.
She said it wasn't. The dictionary disagreed with it.
Oh,
It says
okay.
having or showing sharp powers of judgment.
Okay.
Well, in the actual interlinear of the Greek word, it does say wisely. That's
Right.
Okay.
what it
Okay.
translates to.
Okay, so then if we take that into that, for the sons of this age are more wise in the relation to their own kind than the sons of light. So by sons of light, does that mean like Christians and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's saying that the ungodly are better at having interrelation than the godly?
It's saying, at its essence, yes. But
Okay.
also consider this. So thinking about like modern business deals, when you're talking about like, well, what if I took some money from this thing that's my company is funding this project over here, and I'm going to use it for this project over here, and in doing so, maybe I'm not supposed to, but this project will then flourish, and I can actually get this project going, and this project will be fine over here. And then at the very end, both of the projects succeed because they redistributed resources well. Look from a secular perspective, they would look at that and go, "Well, that looks good. You did very well with these two things. Congratulations and thank you." And you can even explain, "Yeah, I took some of the funds from over here." It's like, well, I think that was still pretty wise. From a secular perspective, it makes total sense. But from a godly perspective, it was wrong for them to transfer the funds over there because they were defying their manager's wishes. That kind of idea. Does that make sense?
That's why Jesus says, that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God.
Right. Because something like in secular society, they can do whatever the heck they want to, but then because they're not accountable to God, like you can make whatever deal you want to, whether it's good or bad, and you still have nobody to answer to except for your manager. And if your manager says it's fine, then who cares?
So is that why when in this story, when the manager said you acted wisely, it was the manager's understanding of wise, or the master's, not the manager, the master's understanding of wise, but not God's understanding of wise.
Right.
So,
What's
okay.
wise in man's eyes is detestable.
I'm so confused though, because I don't see. That seems like a direct contradiction of what I'm understanding here, because it looks like God's saying that the unrighteous man was wise in God's eyes.
If you read
And I guess that's what I'm missing here, is because, like,
verse 15, that's really what it comes down to. That's the explanation. If you're trying to take the explanation out of the narrative, it won't work that well. But taking the explanation out of the explanation, it helps a little bit.
But that seems contradictory. To say that what is highly esteemed among men is successful in the sight of God, but then you go up here and say, the sons of Abram are strict in relation to the kind of the sons of light. And I say to you, if this is Jesus talking, make friends for yourselves by the means of wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it falls you may receive you into the eternal dwellings. Like, I may be not understanding this, but it seems like Jesus is saying, act like this unrighteous man and care more about making these relationships than something else. I don't know exactly what the comparison there is, but like, it's saying, do what this unrighteous man did and prioritize making relationships. Which, if that's the case, that doesn't seem like 15 is correlating with that. Like,
Okay, then what would it mean?
I feel like 14 and 15 may be not related. Like, they're a separate section, right? Because Jesus is saying all these things. And if you have not been faithful in what is given to you, will you not carry to your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either hate the other and love the other, devoted one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things, and they were scoffing at him. So it seems like there's a context, not a context switch, but a focus switch here. So now the focus is that the Pharisees scoffed at the fact that money is not servable or whatever, and he's now addressing that. You are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts, for which is esteemed high among men is detestable in the sight of God.
I found something interesting. It's saying here in verse 9, when it says, and I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of wealth of unrighteousness, it's not referring to make friends as in people, but make friends of the wealth of unrighteousness. So the wealth itself, you are supposed to use the wealth that is unrighteous for righteous means. So for example, giving to the poor. If you are given a ton of wealth and you give it to the poor, that is still within God's principles.
Okay, so what is it saying make friends means?
It says, I found this commentary here, it says, the Greek may mean either make the unrighteous mammon your friend, or make yourselves friends by your use of the unrighteous mammon. There is no proof that mammon is the Hebrew equivalent to Plutus, the Greek god of wealth, blah, blah. Mammon simply means wealth and is called unrighteous by metonymy. The ethical character of the use is representative as cleaving to the thing itself, because the abuse of riches is more common than their right use. It is not therefore necessary to give to the word unrighteous the sense of false or unreal, though sometimes it is almost, we turn mammon into a friend and make ourselves friends by its means, when we use our riches not as our own to squander, but as God's to employ in deeds of usefulness and mercy.
But see, I still see how that contradicts, because saying to you, make friends for yourselves by the means of wealth of unrighteousness. So essentially, all this money that's not being used righteously or whatever, it basically worldly money, right? Am I understanding I'm on the right track with that?
Sure.
Okay. Use that in such a way that it will, like, make you friends.
No. Glorify God. You make friends with your wealth is what it's really talking about, or make friends because of your wealth, but all of that is not about making friends, it's about glorifying God through your use of your money. So this is a really interesting example. For example, is your company a Christian company?
Not 20?
No, you're Classic Law.
You know, I want to ask Kurt that. I'm not entirely sure. Most of us, I know, are Christians. I don't know if all of us are. And he actually regularly has, on our culture snippets every morning, refers to biblical things. But I don't know that we are, as a like a statement, we are a Christian company.
Sure. And then for me, I know for definite fact that State is not a Christian company.
Yeah.
So I make money through the world.
Mm-hmm.
What comes to me, what goes through my hands, is money that is paid by the world
Mm-hmm.
and secular society and by taxes and grants and all that good stuff. That's what pays my way. Sure, there are Christians kind of filtered in that pool of people who pay me,
Yeah.
but in all reality, it's not Christians or Christ who pays me, it's the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it is God, of course, who does it through those means. So if I take the wealth of unrighteousness, the money that I make through secular society, and use that for something that glorifies God, whether it be through, feeding the poor or giving money to charity, whatever, then that is using the wealth of unrighteousness in ways to glorify God. So that way, when they will receive you into the eternal dwellings refers to, I'm supposing in a godly context. If at some point, like I was to, let's see, I'm going to look this up really quick.
That's something really cool on carb.org.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of long. So, you guys are talking about what the story means, and I'm trying to figure out what the heck verse 9 means. And I found in verse 9, Jesus is not praising the dishonesty, but the ability of the steward to recognize the generosity of his master, see what was coming, and use what he had at the time to obtain something far greater, which is self-preservation. This is significant. The fear of the Lord is beginning of wisdom. God can condemn you to eternal damnation. It is wise to seek a way out of that. In fact, the judgment of damnation is so terrible that praise is offered to the one who, in desperation, seeks a way out of it. If the unrighteous steward was praised for trusting the master, how much more will you be rewarded if you trust the true and holy master, the Lord himself? Jesus uses the rabbinic principle of showing how much more. That is, if the widow got what she wanted from the judge, how much more you and God? If the man got bread in the night from his neighbor, how much more you from God? What then does the parable typify? God, the master, is a God of judgment and mercy. Because of his evil, man, the steward, is caught in the crisis of the coming of the kingdom. Excuses will avail the steward nothing. Man's only option is to entrust everything to the unfailing mercy of his generous master, who, he can be confident, will accept to pay the price for man's salvation. The steward was vindicated because he completely trusted the master to be generous, to be good. He was right in doing so. This parable is an appeal to people to understand the nature of God. He is merciful. The predicament of man, he is sinful. The ground for salvation, complete trust in God. How much more dishonest to God are we? How much more deceitful are we? How much more do we owe to God? How much more merciful is God than the rich man? God the Master is a God of judgment and mercy. Because of the steward's evil behavior, he is found out. This is representative of the coming kingdom of God and its associated judgment. Excuses will avail the steward nothing. And it's just a repetition of what I've been saying so far. That was, as he says, Christians need the same kind of wisdom. So it's not...
I don't understand where they
crazy.
got the master being generous.
Okay, so what they're saying is they're looking at the culture context of the time. The culture context of this time is that this master was, they assume more than likely, a landowner. And all these people that the steward was going to get this stuff, all this money from the people were his renters. So what it's saying is that when when the steward was fired, he's thinking, oh shoot, I'm condemned. So before the word gets out, he runs off and he goes to the individuals and he's trying to make the master look good in their eyes by saying, how much is your bill? 100, write it for 50. How much is your bill? 100, write it for 80. And then he takes it back to the master and he says, master, look, I've made you look really good to these people. And the master, and in this way, he has two choices. He can go back and get the rest of his money and show his landowners how terrible he is and how strict he is and all of that, or he can just blow it off and let them see his generosity and move on from there. So that's what they're getting a culture context from.
Okay, so how does this servant have to trust in the generosity of... Okay. So I don't understand. No, that doesn't make sense as generosity, though, because how I see it is the servant comes back and is like, okay, look what I did. The guy has two choices, either go and get his money back or and look like a jerk, or just accept it and look good. But how does this play into the servant? Like, what good did it do him?
He got to keep his job, didn't he?
I don't see that. Like, that's what I'm saying. I don't see that. I don't see him keeping his job or anything. Doesn't say anything to that.
It doesn't say he lost his job either, though. It says that he was going to lose his job. It never said that he did. I mean, there's always the thing of like, they're talking about firing you, but then they don't because you do something great. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying something to think about.
Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be my manager.
Then why is he still his manager?
I'm not saying that he is.
Well, the thing there is between verses 2 and 3, it is that in this commentary it was talking about how the manager said, all right, that's it, you're fired. And then the master said, all right, that's it, you're fired. And the manager is sitting there going, oh shoot, I'm in trouble. What do I do to save myself here? And before the word gets out to any of the landowners, to any of the other servants, to anybody else, the master comes up with this, or the manager, the manager comes up with this plan real quick to go and try to save his rear.
See, that's the thing, yeah. I don't see that either, because if you read verse 3 and 4, it says, the manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me, currently in the process of removing me from it. I am not strong enough to dig, I am ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from management, people will welcome me into their homes.
Well, I mean, those people would...
And it never says anything else about him keeping his job or anything else. Everything is saying he is being removed.
Now, this one here is saying the steward acts as though he is not yet fired. He says, when I am removed. Yet earlier, the landowner had said, you can no longer be steward, present tense. So it is most likely that he was fired on the spot, but the word apparently isn't out yet. And so it keeps going. The steward does not say hello or friend. He's in a hurry. If the renters knew that the steward has been fired and they agreed to the deal, they would risk being thrown off the land by the landowner. Not to mention sinning in their own dishonesty. The relationship between the owner of the land and his renters is a significant personal and economic relationship. Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50 is an attempt by the steward to finish before the master finds out what is going on. If the renters did not think that the steward was acting with the approval of the landowner, they would not have agreed. The risk would be too great. In this account, the steward receives credit for having arranged such a good deal between the landowner and the renters. The renters would be very appreciative and indebted to the steward. Generally, reductions of rent were expected if the conditions warrant. For example, a dried spring, fruit trees dying, drought, etc., but the renters would have to ask for the reduction and then proceed to haggle. Here, though, the reduction is unsolicited. Why does the landowner praise the unjust steward? It would be quite safe to assume that there's some sort of celebrating occurring in the homes of the renters as they rejoice in what they think is the generosity of the landowner.
Okay, that all makes sense. But it still doesn't go in and explain, what the whole purpose of that was.
Verse 9, Jesus is not praising the dishonesty, but the ability of the steward to recognize the generosity of his master.
But where's the generosity of his master?
Okay, so look at this. So you have this whole situation of where he's taking, the steward goes out and he says, hey, here, take the rent for 50 instead of 100 and for 80 instead of 100. And that is something that apparently, and this is just by context, it sounds like, the steward knew the master is generous enough to allow that, and the people thought that would be great, and I guess also didn't question it, so they didn't question the master's generosity either. And so because of all the people except for the master trying to figure out, well, this is what the master would do, this is how the master would handle these things, he's generous, he's good, and so they do them without him actually knowing, and then when the master comes along, he praises the steward because it's like, you knew my generosity in that, I guess. So when it comes down to all the things that happened, he doesn't praise the dishonesty, he praises the fact that the steward knew the master's generosity.
But see, again, I don't see the correlation to how the master's generosity is relevant when everything it refers to is how this guy is expecting help after he's removed, outside of his master. He's expecting help from friends he's made.
Okay, why wasn't the steward executed?
I don't know what you mean.
Why wasn't he executed?
Why would he be?
Why wouldn't he be?
I don't know. I don't know the times. I don't know.
Why wasn't he executed for much less? Why wasn't he executed?
I don't know the times, so I wouldn't know. I don't know their laws or anything like that.
He should have been even executed. Like, the master could have sent people out, go and behead him right on the spot.
Stoned him,
whatever. People have been killed for much less than that.
Okay, so something that Courtney said, maybe he didn't get it because it didn't want it to look bad.
Maybe because the master's generous?
Maybe because the master is merciful.
But, okay, so I still don't understand how the fact that doesn't explain the fact that this seems to be all pointing to him making friends outside of his master.
Yeah, and so
Well,
go ahead.
It's kind of looking into the heart of the steward and how messed up the steward is, because this is about correlating the master's generosity and mercifulness to mercy to God, and how the steward is so messed up and he realizes he's condemned and he's got to do something about it, and he recognizes that his master is generous and his master is merciful because he didn't kill him on the spot. The whole point of this story is to recognize the master's generosity and the master's mercy.
Yeah, and so when it comes down to the context of the steward, the outcome of the steward is almost irrelevant. It's talking about, like, this is what would happen, but it's not the point that's the focus. It's like saying, well, the parable of the sower, for example, we care about, the people who, you have the 4 different types of soil, and we care about each one of them individually, but we care about what the point is. And the point is to be sown in good soil. How come we don't have sermons that are 12 hours long about the soil that, was too rocky and the roots came up and died really quickly? How come we don't talk about that for 12 hours, but how come we talk about the good soil? Because the good soil is the point. That's what matters. It's not that the rocky soil is irrelevant. It's that the good soil is what is the point.
But it seems to me that the point would be very greatly the friends, because that's what it refers to multiple times. I know what I shall do. When I move from management, people will welcome me into their homes. And then it goes down here and just says, for the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves. Like, it seems to me that is the recurring theme. It's talking about...
You're taking it out of context. You didn't finish that verse. The friends for yourselves of what?
Well, my point was, it was mentioning that so many times. The friends, that's what I was trying to explain by just reading those 3 things really, really quickly, was that it keeps mentioning this, but never does it mention the other thing about, like, the grace and mercy of the manager. I mean, it doesn't even say what the manager did with him. It just said he praised him. He got to praise him and then had him executed.
Well, what about the rest of the verses, though? Like in verse 15 and 16 and 17, it talks about...
And that's why I'm saying, like, are we still on the same thing?
Yes, it is all talking about one basic thing, and that is, not one basic, but one story that is multiple basic things. First of all, you have the master, who is generous and good, who I guess is...
So you're saying that 18, everyone who divorces his wife and marries another, is in the same part?
Yeah, it's in the same part.
What? How is it in any relation?
It's not, but it's in the same
Well, that's what I'm saying though. Like, I don't understand how 15 can be explaining or expounding upon like verse 9 any more than verse 18 expounds upon verse 9.
Would it help? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, 18 obviously isn't directly with this, but right when Jesus started speaking, he said that, like, verse 14, the Pharisees who were lovers of money heard all these things. So they heard all of this, what you just said. So when Jesus decided to say that, it could be, yeah, it could be just to that part, but we can't be dogmatic saying it was only for this last part. It could, what we can say was based on all these things that the Pharisees heard. Now he's responding with them because they're laughing at what he said.
Yeah.
Now maybe one thing maybe kind of triggered their laugh, but overall he's saying they heard all of these things and they ridiculed him for it.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is, I feel like what he's saying here, and he said to them, and what follows, is referring to the fact that they were scoffing to him about the teaching he just said. Not about this, is talking about this teaching. He's addressing a different issue.
So then what's your explanation? You seem to be telling everybody that they're wrong, but you don't have an explanation.
No, I'm not trying to say everybody's wrong. I'm just saying I'm having a hard time understanding how it all correlates, because it seems like this is talking about a specific thing, and then an argument is being used from verse 15 everything that's supposed to explain this part, but it feels like it's just pulling away from what it's addressing, rather than explaining.
Okay, so explain it.
I don't understand.
What's the main part? Because I feel like we keep getting really good answers, and then I start feeling like there's one thing that keeps getting you. What's part in this that's like you just can't?
It seems like this is all talking about, like, the whole point of this parable and everything is talking about how important it is, the importance of relations, right?
Okay, no.
Prioritizing making relations with
Okay,
people.
I see where you're getting at. And if you look at verse 14 and 15, so the verses I've been trying to get you to look at, it says, you, talking about the Pharisees, are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts. So if you have the Pharisees who they give money to people and, then they will be welcomed in, the Pharisees is who God is condemning. So he's saying you are making friends of these people, but you are condemned in the eyes of God.
Are you sure? Because
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm very genuinely not sure.
Because to me it seems like it would be addressing the fact, okay, so let me back up. The reason why I have such an issue with the argument that you just made is because that seems like a direct contradiction to the fact that Jesus Christ himself, at least from how I read this, it seems like this is what he's saying. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by the means of the wealth of unrighteous, right? Now, if you're saying that using money to buy friends is justifying yourselves in the sight of men, now that seems like a contradiction. So if I read verses 14 and 15, assuming that Jesus Christ is saying what I think, my brain's like burning up right now because I'm having a hard time understanding this, but if I was to just take my assumption, not at all what I'm saying is happening, but how I'm barely understanding this, is if Jesus Christ is saying make friends with the use of money, and verse 14 or 15 is to not be a contradiction, then I would have to read verses 14 and 15 addressing the opposite of that, and that would be use money to take care of yourselves. Which, wouldn't that be what the Pharisees did? They hoarded the money for themselves to take care of themselves, to secure themselves, so they don't rely on other people.
You keep saying when I say to you that it's Jesus, but how do you know?
Well, and I think that's
basing it on an assumption, and what if your assumption is wrong?
I know, and I think that's...
You see, you're like, okay, so let's talk about this entire thing. Let's talk about evolution. We're all assuming that the Big Bang is correct, so let's talk about things like that. That doesn't make any sense. So if we assume that something wrong is right, then we can have some kind of messed up theology. You have to be very careful.
What?
If I say, and I say to you, and it's talking about Jesus saying that, or it's talking about the Master saying that, or if this is Jesus saying something when he means something else, or if it's just a hard translation, because even commentaries that I found have said it doesn't say make friends for yourselves, but it says make friends of the wealth. That's what the actual literal translation would mean. So it's not saying that Jesus is saying...
What does it mean to make friends of the wealth?
What I was just talking about earlier, about using your wealth for things that bring God glory.
Make friends of the wealth?
It's a metaphor, it's not literal.
But what does it mean? Friends... That's...
So what is a friend?
Someone that you don't have to answer to. Someone you are not a servant to.
Somebody who you are in an equal relationship with. Somebody who is not inferior nor superior to you.
Someone who will help you.
Someone who will help you. Someone take care of you. Somebody who you can talk to.
So what?
If you are friends with money, what does that mean then?
If you're friends with money in a way that you're not devoted to it,
Right. You're not
then
servant
you're
of
not
it.
a servant of it. So then that's what leads into, this is why I'm telling you, those who are unrighteous in little are unrighteous as much. Those who are, gosh, I already forgot. If you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you with the true riches to you? And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? So because you become friends with money and you use it for God's glory and you're not a servant to it, that's why he goes to say no one can serve two masters, for either you'll love one and despise the other, and or you'll be devoted to one and you cannot serve God and wealth. Hate the one and love the other, or else you will be devoted to one and despise the other. I got that messed up, sorry. Is that kind of putting
It's so hard for me to
together?
wrap my head around that. Okay, so
So he's not saying become friends with money in the way that we're friends. Like, I'm friends with Charlton. Charlton is my best friend. I'm friends with Ashton. It's more like, think of money as a tool that God gives you to use for eternity.
Can I read this part? It's just like 3 paragraphs. This interpretation. It's kind of what we've been talking about. Kind of talks a little bit specifically on verse 9. It says, so look at verse 9. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. Jesus is encouraging his followers to be generous with their wealth in this life, so that in the life to come, their new friends will receive them into eternal dwellings. This is similar to Jesus' teaching on wealth in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus exhorts his followers to lay up treasures in heaven. The term unrighteous or worldly wealth seems to strike readers the wrong way, but Jesus is not saying that believers should gain wealth unrighteously and then be generous with it. Unrighteousness is in reference to wealth can refer to 1, the meaning and requiring wealth, 2, the way in which one desires to use the wealth, or 3, the corrupting influence wealth can have that often leads people to commit unrighteous acts. Given the way in which Jesus employs the term, the third explanation seems the most likely. Wealth is not inherently evil, but the love of money can lead to all sorts of sin. So the principle that Jesus is trying to convey is one of a just steward rather than an unjust steward. The unjust steward saw his master's resources as a means for his own personal enjoyment and advancement. Conversely, Jesus wants his followers to be just, righteous stewards. If we understand the principle that everything we own is a gift from God, then we realize that God is the owner of everything and that we are his stewards. As such, we are to use the master's resources to further the master's goals. In this specific case, we are to be generous with our wealth and to use it for the benefit of others.
okay. Oh, there's so much context on all of this that I think this is the problem I'm having. There's this parable, and the parable itself is being difficult to unpack. And then there's the context explanation around it, and then trying to
There is also an added thing that I think we're all skipping over.
Oh gosh, don't add one more thing to this.
The parable is talking about multiple things at the same time, and I think that's what we're fumbling around. Because on the one hand, it's talking about money. On the other hand, it's talking about God's relationship with mankind. And on another hand, it's talking about how the Pharisees are acting. So you have all of these things that are mashed up into the same parable, and so you can kind of fumble over and trip over verses,
But-
because it's talking about different things at different times, all related to the same concept and the same story.
Well, and the audience in this parable was the 12 disciples, right?
And some Pharisees.
And the Pharisees. So Jesus is both teaching the disciples and rebuking the Pharisees for their behavior.
Okay. So, going with what Chris just read. Oh gosh, it's already starting to leave my head because my head can't contain all this. Okay. So, you should really feel my head. It's really warm right now. My brain's on overdrive trying to understand this.
All right, so take it one thing at a time. First thing, Chris talked about the money aspect of it. So the money aspect of it is, just like he said, money is not the root of all evil. It's the love of money. So that's the first thing. You can go on with that if you want to.
I'm just okay. The beginning of the parable is the servant being stupid and squandering riches. Okay, so let's take on that. So the servant has the attitude that money serves me. I'm not friends with it. It's like it uses it to please me, to do whatever I want with. Right now, it's not really his money anyway, it's somebody else's, but the whole point is he's using money as, not as a friend, but as a way to serve him, right? Bring pleasure. So he gets caught in that. There's the exposure of it. Then he's like, okay, money isn't helping me anymore as a servant. I need it as a friend. So then he uses it in order to bless others in such a way that it would bring him like grace or like something that's not like tangible, like it's just an earthly thing. But now he's saying, okay, it's not been helping me as an earthly thing. I need to use it as a like a relationship part, right? Is that making sense?
Keep going.
Because if that's the case, then that makes sense when going on to see Master praised the unrighteous manager because he acted shrewdly, for the sons of this age are more shrewd in their relation to their own kind than the sons of light. It would seem to me that it's saying that when it came down to it, he realized that wasn't going to help, and that. But that doesn't make any sense. Because, I mean, I look at the world today, and if somebody's in trouble for, using money for their own riches, like, they don't use it to go gain friends to help them, do they? Or do they? So if a CEO is embezzling, and he gets caught for doing these things that only serves him.
I think you were on a really good track with where you were going with the steward thinking that the money didn't serve him well anymore.
Yeah, and so he changed.
Find grace.
Yeah, so like, okay, I guess. Oh my gosh, it's so much here is like there was so much here to me that is causing me problems. Because he acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in the relation to their own kind than sons of light. So that section right there, for the sons of this age are more shrewd in the relation to their own light, that's causing me problems. And it says, and I say to you, make friends for yourself by the means of wealth and unrighteousness. That's having me problems. So when it fails, they will receive to you in their dwellings. Okay, so from what I understand, it kind of made sense that, some of what he was saying, how the people of this world try to use money to make friends to take care of themselves in this world. We should be doing so that when we reach heaven, we have friends in heaven. Maybe. I don't know. And then this whole thing of how it relates to he who is faithful in a little thing is faithful in much, and he who is righteousness in a very little thing is like that in of itself. Strip all context out and just say that verse. And it seems like it makes sense to me. Okay, if you're unfaithful in little, it just goes. So we had this discussion earlier about like whatever you do, like that's like however you handle things, you will handle that and whatever. I think maybe actually I was talking, maybe it was my dad or whatever. It's just like if you're a person who acts this way with that, even expounding upon it, you're going to continue acting that way. So like that verse out of context, whatever, completely makes sense. Does it change with context? I don't know, but that one like seems not have much trouble. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust true riches to you? Okay, you've not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth. Well, what's faithful usage of it? Like faithful to what? To Christ? To the master? To the world? Like, And it's, what are true riches? Well, as a Christian, I would understand true riches to be like the riches of heaven, like wealth of God. And it's like, and if you've not been faithful in the use which is another's, well, I have a question of why on earth are you using things that aren't your own? Who will give you that which is your own? Wait, what? Like giving me something I already should own? Like what? And then no servant can serve two masters, for he will either hate the other and love the other, or else to be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Okay, so except for the last sentence, all of that makes sense, right? It makes perfect sense, completely out of context, that you can't do two things at once, right? There's just one or the other. Okay, I get that. And it's like, okay, you cannot serve God and wealth. Okay, now that sentence makes me think, this sentence alone makes all of this trying to pull back to what we were saying before. Okay, there is some correlation. It's not just out of context, but it just doesn't like match up. So then you go on to 14 and 15 and everything, which we keep using as an argument. What's the evidence? Kind of, yeah. For the previous sentences, you are those who justify themselves in the sight of men. Okay, makes sense. So we've heard things solid before. Pharisees try to make themselves look good to men, but God knows your hearts. For that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God. Okay, things that are a big deal in this world, God hates. Cool. The law and the prophets were proclaimed until John, since the time the gospel was preached, but everyone was forcing his way into it, for his eager heaven to hurt the past. So basically, 16 to 18 feel like a complete break. Like, we're talking about all this stuff, and all of a sudden, we're talking about something else. Is 16, 17, 18 relevant or not? Like, is it actually tied to it, or is that a clean break?
They are not tied into the story, but they are tied into the hearts of the Pharisees. So for a little while, he was telling this parable to both the disciples and the Pharisees, and then he turns and he puts his focus only on the Pharisees.
Okay, so I'm glad you said it. So, let me know if this is wrong. Verses 1 through 13... he's addressing and talking to the disciples, teaching them. Yes?
Disciples and Pharisees.
Because what it sounds like to me is maybe, I'm just trying to paint a picture here. I don't know if this is actually how it happened, but this is how I'm trying to understand what's going on at the time. Jesus is maybe at the temple teaching his Pharisees. Okay? And he goes through and there's these parables. Now, he knows that the people's listening, but he's trying to teach his disciples a core concept. So he gets to verse 13, and now the Pharisees were listening to this and being like, we love money. What? That's stupid. Ha ha ha. And now Jesus addresses them.
Yes.
That's okay. A little bit understanding context, which is helpful here. So this is good. So it seems to me that there is a teaching that is happening in 1 through 13 that is not siloed up, but kind of like packaged, all well and good, and delivered, right? Okay. Now, verses 14 and 15, he's addressing the fact that the Pharisees listened to that good teaching, scoffed on it and said it was bad, and now he's rebuking them for that because you try to justify yourselves in the sight of men. So, my following from that is, Jesus is not saying that servant, or whatever it was doing, was highly esteemed among men. Because it seems to me, if we're taking that, and the fact that there's the packaged deal, and then the a rebuking of a response, then it seems to me that we could take verses 1 through 13 and learn from that. Because here's the thing. If the Pharisees had not been there to scoff at that, verses 14 and 15 would never have occurred. Correct? So, if that's the case, then we shouldn't need verses 14 and 15 to understand what verses 1 through 13 were saying.
I disagree with that because it, just like we are having right now, people are misunderstanding it. And so if the Pharisees misunderstood it and Jesus explained it a little bit further, don't you think that we would need a little bit?
But I don't think he's explaining it, but I think he's rebuking them.
I think what he's trying to say is he's seeing the conversation as a whole, starting out with a story, and then Jesus tells a story, and we're getting a lot from it, but the Pharisees didn't. And then the conversation kind of switches gears just a little bit. And even though, yes, we as Christians can understand a little bit of, if we're, depending on how the story and the parable touched us, we can tie what Jesus is saying here a little bit into that same parable, but the Pharisees don't understand it as part of the parable.
That's going to be making a lot of noise into the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I was doing medicine, so. Okay, so, because I think that's what's tripping me up, is trying to use verses 15 to change what the meaning of address the parable itself. It seems like that's where trouble starts to arise for me, because it seems like verses 14 and 15 are a rebuking of the Pharisees for basically saying, yeah, that's stupid, that, like...
Well, you said yourself that the steward pretty much loved money, right? He used it to serve him.
Yes.
And he highly esteemed it.
Yeah.
So I think that specifically, the steward's love of money is specifically saying that which is highly esteemed among men. I think he's talking about money right there.
Yeah.
Is detestable in the sight of God.
Yeah, and what it seems to me is, if I'm thinking about this, right, the steward has been doing this whole time that money serves me and I can do it to please me and all of this, right? And I don't really care about anyone else in this situation, obviously, because he's screwing over his master for it. It's all about him and how money works for him, kind of deal. And then he gets caught in this. All right. So up until this point, I would see that this is Pharisees, right? Now, what happens is there's a shift because he gets caught. And now he realizes he needs to preserve himself. Okay, so there goes in this mode of pleasing and using it to serve me and make me happy and all this to preservation.
Yeah.
So I think this is where it breaks off from being relevant to like what the Pharisees are actively doing. Because I think this is what Jesus, at least in my understanding, I'm not saying it is, but this is what I'm trying to understand. It feels like me is what happens is now the servant's like, okay, I need to stop doing what I was doing and you need to do something different, which is not what the Pharisees want to do. And he's like, I need to use this to make relations with friends. I'm going to use the money to give to people, give in the loose term because he didn't really give them money, he just reduced what they had to pay, which in a sense gives people money, but anyway, economics aside, essentially then uses that to make the whole make friends statement, right? Now, it's still confusing to me about what happens after the fact, whether or not he still got let go and all of that. But I don't know necessarily that's important if we take this thing as that Jesus is saying money should be used for personal relation, not for self-pleasure, right? And that's where I think the Pharisees were scoffing at. They were scoffing at the fact that I don't need it to make friends so I rely on people, because I can rely on money. I just need to use all this money to earn it and or to get it, weasel my way into getting it, so that I can use it for self-reliance, right? For independence, for pleasure, and all of that, but not to preserve myself through friends. And I feel like that's what Jesus' whole point with this is. And verses 14 and 15 are just addressing the fact that the Pharisees would scoff at that because they feel that they can use money to, because they love money, they can use that to solve their problems, and they don't need reliance on anybody else. They don't need to use it to make friends or anything like that. That its only purpose is for their ability to be independent, self-reliant, and to please themselves. Does that make sense at all, what I'm thinking?
Bits and pieces.
Because if it makes you feel any better, I don't half understand myself.
I think he understands. I think you answered some of your own questions. Did you? That's what I'm assuming.
Well, I mean, I've got in my own head how I'm thinking I understand this, especially understanding, like, if I take verses 14 to 15, which is what I kind of thought it was, is a separate break from the fact that he's addressing how the Pharisees were reacting, and how the Pharisees react to that message to me, it seems like the Pharisees react to that message that way because they're independent and reliant on money because they love it and it serves them.
Right.
And so, to me, that means Jesus is saying here that money is only useful when used for relational things, right? Not self-reliance.
And for glorifying God, yes.
But see, not that I disagree that money should be used for glorifying God, it's I just don't see that in this parable.
True riches.
Okay, so that was actually beyond the parable. There was many other things I said were confusing to me, and that is, therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust true riches for you? So there's two breakdowns of my issues here. If you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, what does that mean?
What if I told you this is a parable about you?
Okay.
What if I told you that there was God who had a manager named Sean, and Sean squandered all of God's possessions that he gave him, and then he called to him and said, and then God says, what is this I hear about you? Giving an account for your management, for you can no longer be a manager. And then Sean said to himself, what should I do since God is taking the management away from me? And I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. And then Sean says, what shall I do so that when I'm removed from God's management, people will welcome me into their homes? And so Sean said to a bunch of the people who, I guess, master's debtors, I don't know what to equate that to, but, and he began saying to them, so, here's something that God does, and God is generous.
Let me pause you for a second because I can fill in some details for you. God says He's going to remove my job from me. That blesses me with all this money that I've been squandering.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm about to lose my job and know that I can't, too weak to dig because I am not in shape and I'm definitely too ashamed to beg. So what I'll do is I'll start blessing people with what I do have left in order to hopes that they would take me in whenever
you lost your house.
I lost my job and everything. Okay, continue.
Okay. So you see where I'm going with this.
And I think, honestly, what I've been feeling like this whole time that you're really struggling with the story is you relate to it hardcore.
Probably, yes.
And you're trying to figure out...
The last 15 minutes.
Yes. I've seen that since we started. And you're trying to figure out all these little bits and pieces so that you understand it so that you can be better.
And so it really comes down to, in the midst of all of this stuff, all the exact things that happen, at the very end, if you are doing with, in one last ditch effort, you're saying, I'm going to take everything I have and I'm going to give everything to other people. And it's not a bad thing either. You're doing it genuinely because you feel like you need to do that for God's glory, that alone. And so with that, you are giving people discounts on things that they owe you, I don't know, or giving away the things that you have, so that way other people are blessed, so that way other people will take you in. And then God praised Sean because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than sons of light. And so Sean then made friends for himself by using the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when his money fails, the other people will receive him into their dwellings. And so then Sean, who, when he was faithful in the little that he had in the very end, could be considered faithful in much. But because earlier Sean was unrighteous in very little, he was also unrighteous in much. And therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? So if you haven't used your money the way that God wants you to now, just your secular income, your dollar bills, then why would he entrust you with greater things like a church or students to teach?
Okay.
Or your calling.
Or you can go,
So I'm going to continue not using it during...
So...
Okay, so... that all makes sense then. So Jesus is saying what I originally thought, that the money should be... Okay, so... Yeah, that's... Isn't that what I've been saying? Isn't that what I've been saying?
I don't know. You can go either way. It's really confusing. But it seems like you could really very much go either way, and I figure either one of them work. Because on the one hand, if you say you are making friend of the unrighteous wealth, like the Greek would suggest, then that still makes sense. And then also making friends by your use of unrighteous wealth, that still makes sense. Either way, it makes sense.
I'm going to go with the one making use of it because I still cannot grasp the concept of friends with money.
So either way it goes. So I really don't know. Once again, we're all going in this and none of us can figure this out because this is really confusing.
Yes.
But on the one hand, let's just assume either one can be correct and then we'll figure out which one is heresy and then we can just say that one's not right. And if neither one of them are heresy, then I figure we can probably apply both.
That's what the really interesting thing about Jesus' parables is that everybody's going to relate to them in a different way. And we may not relate to this friends of wealth, unrighteous wealth. So I think at this point, I mean, we could keep talking and talking and talking about this, which we've been doing for a long time. It's almost 1 o'clock.
Yeah, we're going to need to do the whole thing of just forgetting this. And
Yeah, because what needs to happen now is, first of all, we need to pray about it. And we probably should spend some time in it on our own. And then seek wise counsel. So we've gone as far as we can here. We need to go seek people who are wiser than us, so we probably can talk to, I don't know, we can talk to Sam or Tim or somebody or Bob, and you can talk to your dad, and you can talk to Roger. Roger might know, I don't know. Roger. I was like, wait, who does he have in his life that he goes to for wise counsel? I don't even know.
I don't think you do, right? Because that's one of the things you said many times, that you want someone to be able to disciple you. And
Yeah, well, I mean, usually I go to Buto and we usually
There you go,
went through
Buto.
where God's word. But I meant,
Yeah. So, sorry, I couldn't think. I totally blanked out on who you could talk to. I'm so sorry. So, and you can talk to your grandpa. So, I think that's where we're at with that.
sorry for dragging that out so long. I was just like really confused about how we were like.
this was a pretty confusing verse. And like as I was looking up commentaries and stuff like that, it said that this is one of the most confusing parables in the Bible. And like I was thinking about it, I don't know if I've ever actually heard anybody talk about that. And then there's also the fact of
Thanks, Char.
one person used what?
You just picked the most complicated.
I picked it for verses 19 forward because that was something relevant to the rich man and Lazarus. That's why I picked this chapter.
we didn't even talk about
Oh,
that.
I didn't. That's why I'm so messed up
I
about this whole
forgot. I
thing.
keep thinking the chapter ends after verse 18.
No, and verse 19 until 31 is what I was talking
The
about.
part that I read.
That's why I'm so messed up about this whole thing. And, but anyways,
That's why you gave me this half, because you knew no one would want to talk about it.
I had no idea what he was going to do.
Next time I'm gonna make sure I read the whole chapter, not just the part that I wanted to read, and wanted to be read. But anyways, they said that this first half of Luke 16 was used as like an argument against Christianity because it seems to contradict so heavily with the rest of Scripture and saying that Jesus encouraged unrighteous behavior in this. And so like from a very surface level view, it really seems that way, but from delving into it, as we can see, it's so much more complicated and weird and stuff. So yeah, I think at this point we either need to switch gears or do something because it's 1 o'clock and that's not enough time to go over this.
Last time I looked at the clock,
Yeah,
which
things
felt
like
like
that.
5 minutes ago, it was noon.
Then it wasn't 5 minutes.
It felt like 5 minutes
Maybe
ago.
next week we should just read the other half of this again.
The other half of
And then have a whole Sunday long conversation about it.
I was
But
really
it's
funny
actually
though
appropriate
because
like that verse, that second half goes into so heavily about what we're going to talk about in the spiritual realm.
So what you're saying is not only do we not have the time for that, but we haven't actually even properly prepared for it.
Right. Exactly. That is exactly correct.
is there something we can do to be more efficient about going through the statement of faith?
No, and you know what? I was actually thinking about it. I wonder if God sometimes has us have these days where we can't get to it because we have other conversations
that we have to have before we get to it.
Yeah, because like I know that not everyone's in love with doing this every single Sunday, so I'm wondering if God's like, all right, break time, have something different to go through, and touch about something that's going a little bit deeper, and then
We've been
continue
going
on.
through this a long time.
I estimated, wasn't it 2 years?
No, it
It
was
was a
until the
year.
end of the year, and then
But today brought us
It
back
is
another
okay.
year.
it was. We joked about it because we said we could go until the end of the year with it, and then we re-go over it a second time.
No.
And
How many sections are there?
I thought it was like 33.
Okay, so it is less than a week. I mean, listen.
Less than a week.
Sorry, that's less than a year because there's 52 weeks in a year. I thought for some reason it was like a year and a half, almost 2 years.
No, it was a year, and until the end of the year, like we estimated we could get done around December, and then we were talking about like, well, we'd go over it again with some changes, and then we would go over it a third time for some reason. I don't remember.
Just to
what.
refine it.
Yeah, just something goofy about that. But we were talking about just going over it for like 2.5 years or something.
Well, that was a crazy discussion. Did we even learn anything?
Okay, so to
I
sum
think
up,
we need some time to digest it.
we do. To sum up what I guess
Don't
we
try.
understand.
Nobody comment on his summary.
But what if it's wrong?
What I guess we're trying to understand is, first of all, in relation to money, to use the things that God has given us, not to squander them, but instead to use them in a way that glorifies God, that builds relationships with others. Any of those things are probably right. And then it also talks about the relationship between the manager and the master, which is the Christian's relationship to God, or even like a Christian who's not very good. I don't know how we can go into that later, whatever. But it's talking about how, first of all, how sinful man is, but also how generous God is and how good he is. And then taking that a step further, even though the manager, who, whether you could say he's a metaphor for a Christian or not, I'm not sure. I'm kind of leaning toward like he's a Christian who is not a very good Christian kind of thing.
He's a Christian who did something really bad. And
Or is he a
realizes
Christian, or it
needs to-
doesn't matter? Like, I honestly was going to say that I don't know that I agree necessarily that the master and servant really relate to God and Christians at all, but was really like just trying to explain something. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know that it actually is supposed to try to correlate to a specific person
And I
or
don't-
group,
And
but
there's no
rather,
explanation about it,
yeah.
which parables usually don't. And there are so many parables in the Bible that go without explanation that people have to figure out later. And I don't know if we've actually figured it out. Probably not. There's probably a meaning to it that when we hear it, we're all like, that actually makes total sense. Why do we not know that? But because it is a parable, and because literally all of Jesus' parables are confusing, we probably have not gotten fully into it. But regardless, let's just say that, we don't know what it is. This is a possibility of one of the things, talking about the relationship between God and man. I don't know if it is possible, maybe not.
Is there an explanation of
there's-
that parable somewhere?
There's not in the Bible. I looked.
You put the most complicated parable in your word, and you don't
I'm
tell us
telling
what
you.
it means.
Scholars have been trying for over 2,000 years.
Yeah.
I think that today the most beneficial thing that we got out of it was when he related to it.
Yeah. And then
Our personalities are the same. I can't put my hands behind my head when you do.
So then anyways, concluding then the context of the physical Jesus telling people at the temple, you have the idea of him talking to the disciples with also Pharisees and mixed crowd listening, and then you have relation to the Jesus rebuking the Pharisees specifically. Let's try to say that, Pharisees specifically. Say that.
No, let's move on.
Through them listening, and so Jesus rebuked him. So we have a whole lot of things that are kind of intermingling in this story. That's what I see through it. Was there something I missed?
And then there's a whole other half to the chapter that we didn't
Yeah,
even
there's the
get
other
to.
half of the half. I give up. Other half of the chapter.
I like the other chaff of the half.
The other half of the chapter. other half of the chapter that I actually wanted to talk about, that would just
I think we talk ourselves in circles so much you're dizzy.
Yeah, I think we are done.
I actually don't want to read this parable for like another day or two.
Yeah, I don't want to look at it either. I'm scared of it now.
Like, even when
I
you
get
want
to
to do the last synopsis of it again, I'm like, oh god.
Yep. I actually was sitting here thinking, how many of us, when we read the Bible and we're to go through Luke and we're to see chapter 16 and skip it?
This is that part.
So.
Yeah, that's weird. Alright, so I guess we're kind of just going to cut it there, or is there something we want to talk about for our last...
I think we should discuss Revelations.
Revelations is not a book in the Bible. You're talking
I think we all
about
need a
Revelation,
nap.
just singular.
Oh, whatever.
What did he say? I wasn't listening.
He said Revelations, and then Charlton had to be facetious
Charlton.
about it.
Yep. Ah man, well that was nice and confusing. So
Well, it is
somebody wanna-
multiple revelations in the book of Revelation, though.
Well, but if you think about it, the Bible is Revelations. It is a book of Revelations because it is what God reveals about Himself.
All right.
We need to stop torturing any viewers that will be watching.
I apologize to all viewers that we may have. This was a really jacked up sermon.
They all unsubscribed after this.
If you like this video, like it. If you
Please
didn't like
comment.
it, please just ignore this video and come back another day.
Please pretend this video never happened.
Go seek wise counsel of what chapter
Yes.
16 means.
Go look up
If you
somewhere
learn anything.
about
Yeah.
Comment.
chapter 16. We're probably
If
gonna
you
get
are a wise
comments
counsel,
about
please
it.
comment on this video.
Actually means.
Today's service is brought to you by Campbell's Chicken Noodle Soup.
All right, do we want to pray to close?
That's probably smart.
Yeah. Somebody else needs to pray. You and I pray, so.
Thank you for volunteering.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch a tiger by the rooster. Everybody's looking at you, Chris.
Why?
I don't know.
I'll pray. I'm not gonna force anybody to pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you that we have been able to have this discussion. It is weird that we don't fully understand it, and we've fumbled over ourselves and each other a lot. And I pray that we are able to have a deeper understanding of what this means and how we can apply it to our lives. And if we have actually hit on it, I pray that that will be reaffirmed. And Lord, I pray for in the future other confusing passages that we are able to find a way to more effectively, have an expository discussion about them, because they are really dense and hard. And I mean, it's not that your word is so simple, but I pray that we can have that understanding that systematically throughout the Bible what your word says and apply it to each individual scripture, so we are not examining things out of context. We're not examining things in a way that it cheapens the word of God, or a way that creates heresy, but instead it's a way that we are taking your word and we're applying it to every single verse in it. So I pray that we will come to have a greater understanding of your word through all this. I praise you and thank you for everything, Lord, in your name. Amen.
Amen. Okay.
All right. Well, I guess
Well,
that's that.